Kia ora everyone, welcome back to another episode of Both Sides Now. We're with Raf Manji today, the leader of the Opportunities Party. Raf, thanks very much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, so we've just come from the great Agri debate. It was fantastic to have you there. Any key outtakes from the debate? How'd you find it?
I thought it was very polite, and there was generally reasonable agreement about obviously the issues, which is a good start. And yeah, obviously some disagreements about, particularly the emissions reduction approach, but everyone's signed up to the methane targets, the Zero Carbon Act, well, maybe Act, not so much. I was quite positive. I enjoyed it. Being a sort of non-farmer, my focus is very much on tech and innovation. And it was good to be able to talk about that. We didn't talk about the leadership stuff, which I had prepared to talk about, but I think maybe we can talk about that a little bit. But no, it left me feeling quite optimistic about the future of the sector because, I guess there's been a lot of negativity around it.
Fantastic. Yeah. Is that rural vote? You guys are obviously targeting the urban centres, right? Is that something you feel like you're missing out on or could look at looking at in the future? In
the future, definitely. But in terms of our resources, we've made strategic decisions, but certainly the youth rural vote is interested. So we get people emailing us in from all over the place saying, I looked at your policies, quite like it. And, we're pro-farming, which makes us obviously different to the Green Party, for example. And we're pro-business and obviously, pro-people as well. So that's quite attractive for people, young people, wherever you live.
So you don't think the Green Party's pro-farming?
Not really, no. I think they've been very anti-farming and they never talk about business, and farming essentially is a business. And yeah, I think the conversation is changing a little bit around regenerative agriculture. A little bit, it's a new way of talking about sustainability, ecosystem management. But I think they've generally been quite negative about it.
Changing tack slightly. So this how we always begin with these podcasts is we always ask, what is your political ideology or philosophy?
I would say I'm a liberal, first and foremost, a classical liberal, so probably a sort of an 18th century type liberal. I'd like to see a fair society where everyone has the opportunities to thrive. We are generally non-partisan in that we're very solutions focused. So we're focused on solving problems. And yeah, the fairness piece is is this a fair thing to do? Is this a fair policy to implement? Is this fair law? So fairness is probably the driving value, but also efficiency is quite important to us. I'm a finance guy, so I like to know that the money that we choose to spend is going to be spent wisely, but absolutely pro-investing in the future. So that's absolutely critical. So yeah, we don't, we're teals. We're focused on the future, focused on the climate, but focused on getting, solutions and policies that work.
How do you define fairness? Because obviously, what's fair to me as a female can be different to what's fair to Finn as a male, and what's fair, as Pākehā versus Māori. How do you define fairness?
That's the challenge. I mean, that's where you do have, I guess, the political discussion. I mean, for me, justice as fairness in terms of if you're sitting around a table and you don't know where you sit in the pie or what your particular position is in society or what your identity is, and you have to sort of say, do I think that's fair in that will apply to you? I think that's quite a good way of looking at the concept of fairness. So it's kind of it's known as the sort of the veil of ignorance. It's not perfect, but it's a good sense of not just, is it fair to me as in now? So if I'm very well off and I might be impacted slightly, and I don't like that, but actually if I don't know where I sit in society, do I think that's a fair thing to do? So fairness for me is based on those types of principles.
Do you think that voters are well enough educated to be able to actually sort of articulate that when they go into the voting booth? And why they would vote for you?
Probably not, no. And that's why we're really big on civic literacy as well as financial literacy. But we would love to see, kids in schools learning about our democratic system and how and why we make decisions. And I think that the how and the why is really critical as opposed to what the particular outcomes are, but how you actually come to these conclusions, and I think that is a good place to start.
So I seem to have a disproportionate number of people in my life who want to vote for Top, including, I think, all four of my flatmates. I'm clearly doing something wrong as a National Party member. But why do you think this doesn't actually translate into increased polling numbers for you guys?
That's a very good question, and I've got an interview to respond to, which asks that question. Look, I don't know. I mean, I'm a data guy. I understand polling. I think a lot of polling, because of the way it's done as a random sampling system, a lot of our votes are very concentrated in certain areas, so particularly urban areas and particular bits of the population where you're right, I just get feedback constantly. I think we don't get a lot of coverage. Therefore, awareness actually is quite low. So a lot of people just go, I've never heard of TOP. What are they about? And now we assume that everyone knows who you are, but that's not the case. And I think, a lot of the average median voters are not switched on to politics. They can't name their local MP. I think some polling in Ireland, like less than, I think 40% of people could even name the MP. So it just shows you how detached people are. I think post-COVID, there has been a hangover of apathy, where I'm seeing, compared to say 2017, people are much less interested in politics and much less connected. But that they will come to that for the election in these last sort of 2 to 3 weeks, where I think we will do a lot better. So I think we've had a 4% poll, we've had a number of 3%, we've had a load of 1%, we've had 2%. So I think we're probably around 2%. Polling we did probably earlier in the year showed that our base vote is around 2 to 3%, but there's another 8 to 10% who quite like us. And that's that whole wasted vote thing.
Do you think it is partly because people are worried about wasting their vote? They think that top sounds like some great ideas, but I don't really want to waste my vote if I'm outside Ireland. What do you say to someone who says, I'm just going to waste my vote if I vote for top? It's
not. I mean, I think, and particularly in this election where people are probably not as wedded to the big parties as they probably used to be, now's your chance just to have a go. Have a go, because we could get over 5%. If all the people who told me it's a wasted vote voted for us, we would be there. And there's nothing we can really do about that except just say to people, vote for what you think is a good idea. End of story.
You've proposed a TOPS tax rate of 45% and a land value tax, yet you're also proposing a teal visa to allow high net worth individuals into New Zealand. Do you think that the top 45% tax rate is counterproductive to this?
Look, not particularly. It's quite interesting because that is to pay for the teal card. Now, when we brought out the teal card and we costed it and we were very conservative around the cost, we actually think we can do it probably for 2/3 of the cost. We thought we had to show how you could pay for it. Now, we could take the approach of other parties and say, we're going to get it by cutting public services. Now, that's kind of just pie in the sky stuff. There's no real numbers behind that, but people buy it because actually people only hear the good bit they're going to get. They go, oh yeah, we're going to cut public services by, or Labour, 4 billion. It's like, what? Suddenly you're going to cut public services by 4 billion? What have you been doing the last 3 years? And everyone else say, oh, we're going to cut this, we're going to cut that. We actually said, this is how you can actually pay for it. Now, what's happened with our tax proposals is we've ended up very similar to Australia. We could have actually just gone, let's copy the Australian tax system, because essentially that's what the Australian tax system is. So I think our preference is for lower income taxes over time, but in terms of investing in the future, we think this is the best way to do it.
Where do you sit on a capital gains tax?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think my personal journey, and I think probably the party's journey, which started off very much kind of, very hard around sort of evidence and data, is actually what is achievable. And I think a capital gains tax is not perfect, but it could still do the job. And we would certainly support that. And it's just a shame no one's come out with it in this election.
So you've talked a little bit about, you're a finance guy, and we've got a lot of possibly overreach on government spending. How far do you think government spending has gone, and how much would you bring it back by?
I think the mistake that the Minister of Finance made after the COVID splurge was actually not raising taxes. And it's because nobody likes to talk about this stuff. But you put a lot of money into the economy through essentially transfer payments and spending. Traditionally, for any fiscal policy management, you would raise taxes to take that money back out of the economy. But because raising taxes is a taboo subject in New Zealand, they just left the Reserve Bank to whack up interest rates, which doesn't solve the problem and really impoverishes people who are high on debt. And particularly for farmers, that is a massive issue. And so we've got interest rates which are way higher than they needed to be. Now, so if they employed things, whether it's windfall taxes or just say, okay, for 2 years, we're raising income taxes at the top end by X amount, that does two things. One, it brings revenue in, but it also dampens consumption and demand, which is driving a lot of the spend. But there was never, ever a conversation about that. So I think, the government I think where they've wasted a lot of money is on the centralization programs. So the three waters, the Polytechnic, obviously the health system has been a disaster. and obviously the media merge and all the stuff they spent money on that never went anywhere. It's real money. Now that is wasted money, but it is money that has gone into someone's bank account. It hasn't just disappeared, but it hasn't achieved anything for people. So it's added to debt and added to our sort of fiscal burden for no good outcome. If it had a good outcome, even if you'd built a bridge, at least you've got a bridge there. It has some productive capacity. So it's been a little bit disappointing. Yeah.
So are you not a fan of centralisation of all the systems then? Is that something you would have chosen to do, centralising your thing?
No. So from a principle perspective, we are totally for decentralisation and driving decisions down to the most accessible part of the community. I'm a big fan of regional governments for the future. I see it, it's almost an 1840s model, going back to regional government and delivering all services out of Canterbury, out of Otago, out of Auckland, out of Waikato, out of Wellington. And the problem with Wellington is it's a bubble. It's also a kind of thought bubble, and people there are out of touch. And this is why I get why farmers get really hacked off about the regulatory burden. It's these guys haven't sat on a farm, and when they do a press release, they get the gumboots on and stand by a hay bale. But that's all stage stuff. You know what I mean? So decentralization also is more efficient and it creates resilient systems. So if one part of the system goes down, it doesn't impact everyone else. And I think when we think future-wise, we think about what happened in the Hawke's Bay, the ability for other centres to respond. And we know Wellington has a huge amount of risk. I mean, Wellington, the water system is stuffed. They had a massive water turn-off yesterday. And having everything centred there is not a smart idea.
New Zealand's got a relatively small population though, right? So there's an argument to be made that having a smaller team of bureaucrats and run one place in a country that is pretty small in population, you've actually got a less total amount of bureaucrats than if you've got people in every different city controlling the water assets, and there's not as much communication between the two, and then some get a better deal than others, right? So how do you get around that with Three Waters?
You can have Three Waters is something I know quite a lot about, having overseen that kind of the skirt program as chair of finance at Christchurch City Council, and it was a really efficient system, and it was based on a couple of principles. A central design shop. So if you think about the policy, so a central design shop, and then an alliance contracting model and a long-term work pipeline. And if we translate that to the Three Waters, you've got local government saying, well, here's our water program, 30-year water program. We can have a centralized design system, which could be anywhere in the country, because everyone's doing the same type of work, like how to design particular systems, wastewater systems, etc. And then you set up local alliance contracting models to deliver the pipeline of work. Now, that can be funded centrally, but you don't need these new entities. It's the entities that are the problem, and the shifting of assets from one balance sheet to a new balance sheet. And I remember the Prime Minister was asked this question because I asked a journalist to ask her, what's this balance sheet separation? Why do you need it? And she couldn't answer the question because I know she didn't know, but it was sort of the buzzword. And on the same day, Kainga Ora, which has a separate balance sheet from the Crown, had decided that it would go back to borrowing from the Crown balance sheet because actually lenders had lent them enough money. And essentially there was no need for that balance sheet separation, or the Crown is backing all this debt anyway, so back it efficiently. So it's basically separating out the funding, the policy or the design, and the delivery. But there's no need to move the assets. I mean, it's going to create havoc. I can just tell you from a finance person, we did that with our social housing. We moved our social housing into a community housing trust, and even that was a pain. We had the Auditor General all over us. It's very challenging to set up new entities like they're planning. I mean, I can tell you, I'm short that trade completely. It's not going to happen.
So Three Waters is something you guys are obviously pretty across. Yeah. If you get into Parliament, you're only going to have a couple of shots at getting a few key bits of legislation over the line. What are going to be your top priorities?
Yeah, the priority for us, I mean, obviously if I win Ireland, some Christchurch stuff. So we've proposed a comprehensive cancer care centre, which is a proposal by the Christchurch Cancer Foundation. This is a long-term investment in cancer care and laboratory services as well. And, other things for Christchurch, which, probably would be signed off without too much trouble. The teal.
Why is that? Why won't there be too much trouble?
Because they're not huge amounts of money. And they're things, so for example, we want to electrify the urban bus fleet, which is already a government policy. We want to bring it forward to 2030, particularly not just for emissions reductions, but air pollution reduction as well. I mean, I live on a bus route, and you can tell the difference between the electric buses and the diesel buses is really clear. We want to make sure the cathedral is repaired because that's going to deliver a lot of development around the square because they're waiting for that, and it needs money to let the contracts out to 2027 so that it can be completed, and that money needs to be underwritten. So even if the Crown underwrites it and they raise the money separately, they need to be able to let those contracts. So those are some critical issues. The other big one is a proposal which Labour has now copied for 150 community constables on the beat. So this is basically police walking on the streets 24/7, 10 different areas in Christchurch to give it just a basic sense of visibility, that the police are around, they're around the transit hubs, they're around the malls, and they're there on hand. Whereas at the moment, if you call 111, if it's not a life-threatening issue, the police don't come out. And people have got to the point where they're going, well, hold on a sec, this is a bit off. So, these are Christchurch issues. Some of these can be taken at a national level. And our other main focus really is the teal card, is at least getting the tech underway, starting to get some of these systems into place. And in terms of, like I said, in terms of, it's probably going to be a national act government. If we were working with them, infrastructure, we've got a lot of, synergies around our infrastructure, decentralization, social investment, of which the teal card is a big part of that, and public efficiency. So I think for a 3-year term, that is more than enough to be getting on with. So that will be our kind of focus. And then obviously basically a science and innovation overlay to how government, performs and supports the sector.
I do note when I was doing some research, and do correct me if I'm wrong, that you had taken the universal basic income off TOP's kind of main policies. Why did you decide to do that?
Because we couldn't deliver it. So I'm really, I'll tell you, universal basic income is inevitable. I mean, the impact, I didn't raise it today because I just thought it'd be too complicated. But AI on farms is a whole different issue. But the impact of artificial intelligence and technology is going to be phenomenal in every area of our life. And the welfare and income support system is probably not going to be able to cope with the turnover of jobs. It's not so much that there are going to be no jobs left. There will be, but there will be a lot of turnover of jobs. There'll be a lot of retraining, and a universal basic income is the simplest way, to make sure that people can come in and out of work without having to pop down to Wins every 5 minutes and sign all these ridiculous documents. And are you looking for work? It's like, I don't know. I'm actually looking at a new business, or I'm going to do some retraining, or whatever. We should just cut that out. The overhead admin is so expensive. But in terms of trying to deliver that now, I mean, we could have talked about it, but I'm very focused on, if you have a policy, you have to know you can deliver it. So we've said by 2030, we think we can deliver it. And essentially the teal card is a platform access for universal basic income, even if we trial it first on under 30s.
Do you think there's, though, with universal basic income, right, like there are people who, I guess, are never going to, are recession-proof, never going to be affected. Do you not think it's arguably a waste of money to just have, basic income going to them every month when there are people who, in desperate need, could be having more?
It's the trade-off between targeting or universality. So if you get the tax system right, those people essentially are giving it back in tax. It's with the technology we've got, that stuff should be really straightforward. And the way our tax systems are still really clunky. So there's work to do with IRD, there's work to do with MSD. And I'm kind of almost in a position that with a lot of our approaches, I think in the past with TOP have been very kind of push. It's like saying, hey, this is the best idea, we have to do this. And I've taken more of a pull strategy, which is, hey, we think these are good ideas. And I'd much rather people sort of come towards them than us trying to sort of push stuff that maybe people are not ready for as well. I mean, people are not ready for that. Pay people to kind of sit around. Well, all the research shows they don't. They go out and do stuff. It improves efficiency. The abatement system we have in social welfare means that people who would like to work don't work because they'll be worse off because of the abatements. I mean, the whole system is kind of anti-work. So we want people out there working, whether it's 5 hours a week or 10 hours a week or 20 hours a week, or if they're looking after kids and they just want part-time work. And at the moment, our system can't really cope with that flexibility, and flexibility in the way people live, the flexibility in family structures. It's still a system almost based on mum, dad, and the 2 kids. Well, actually, the world's moved on from that big time. So I think for us, it's about getting into Parliament. It's about having some of these conversations. It's about doing the work with officials to say, this is what we want. What do we need to do to make it happen? I've spoken to people around the traps in these spaces. Yeah, but they think it's certainly doable.
So you're talking a bit about the new top versus the top of old. Do you chat much with Gareth Morgan and Jeff Simmons, the previous leaders of the Opportunities Party?
No. I mean, I haven't spoken to Gareth at all about this. I've bumped into him a few times in Wellington, but we just have a chit chat. It's like it's past, and Jeff has got a new job. And sometimes, Jeff was involved really till probably the beginning of this year, but he's got a completely new job, and you just kind of have to just, let people move on from stuff in a way. And, Top's been quite a challenging journey, because you have to put in a huge amount of effort. And we're like the odd one out, because we're not a fringe party. Everyone knows our policies are extremely sensible, well-researched. So they have us on the panels and stuff, but then they go, but you're not in Parliament and you're not polling at 5%. It's like, how do we fit you in? So sometimes we get invited to stuff, sometimes we don't. And then people go, where's Top? And then sometimes they go, why is Top invited here? And then they go, oh, they spoke the best on the panel. So the 5% threshold is kind of like our supermarkets, banks. It's a competitive barrier to entry. And actually it's a real challenge, because how do we get new ideas out there in front of people? It's difficult.
So you are pro lowering MMP threshold then?
Oh God, yeah. I mean, of course, that's totally self-interested, but the whole point of MMP was that it's supposed to be bringing parties in and out, and you rely on the voters to go, well, this lot was a load of rubbish, out next time. And they've done that with New Zealand First. But 5% is very hard. And we've ended up essentially with, Labour Greens, National Act, New Zealand First floating around, whatever the opportunity presents for them, and Te Pāti Māori, who are there really because they've got the Māori seats. And it's kind of what I'd call it's congealed. So we don't have a lot of fresh stuff out there. And hopefully this election, I think if we can get in, we can change the conversation at least. And I think that's going to be quite important.
So how could that dynamic play out? Because it's all about Ireland for you guys. If you get Ireland, you might get a couple more. Let's say National Act had a drop in the poll numbers, didn't quite get there, and you were an option. Is that's an option for you as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my prediction, which I made 6 months ago, is that National Act will get 59 seats. We will get 3 to 4, and New Zealand First will probably get 6 or 7. And the question is going to become clearer in the next couple of weeks. I don't think the polling is going to change that much, but I think that's where it's going to be. I don't think Labour has a path to government at all. So the question will be, hey, everyone, do you want National to be working with Winston or Raf? And I know 95% of people go Raf, particularly all the National Party people. So I think that is going to become a little bit clearer. Should National do a deal in Ireland? Yes, they should. Are they going to? Probably not. But I think I can win it anyway, because I think people are coming to that conclusion.
So how close are the polls in Ireland at the moment?
Look, the 2 polls are being done. Another one may well be being done next week. There was a Curia poll, but only 400 people showed Hamish way out in front, like 33% against 15, but 23% undecided, and 11% actually voted for people who aren't standing. So we kind of thought actually it wasn't a particularly good poll if you're actually voting for people who are not actually standing. The poll on the Christchurch Mayoralty, a similar sort of poll, similar amount of time out last year, had David Mates like 32% behind Phil Major, and he finished 3% behind. So, these very small polls are quite tricky. We had some research shared with us, which we didn't commission, which is why we didn't release it formally, which showed me 4% behind Hamish. And that was a much larger sample over, a longer period. And that sort of matched our feedback in terms of what people were telling us. And so I think it's a 2-horse race. And look, it's 50-50, I think.
Have you had conversations with National about getting them to do a deal?
I've had conversations with a lot of people close to National who say, why aren't they doing a deal with you? And I think it's because, look, I mean, fair enough, Chris has been focused on doing his job, which quite frankly is day in, day out. It's just a waterfall. But their strategists, certainly people are aware that Ireland potentially was a free insurance for them. They may need us, they may not, but they know they can work with us quite easily. And there are also a lot of people on the list who actually are more likely to get in if I win Ireland. So essentially, if Hamish wins Ireland, that's 1 list seat less for people waiting on the list. And so there's quite a few people going, actually, Raf, I hope you win, because then I might have a better chance of getting in on the list. So I think frankly, it's, whether New Zealand First get in or not, and I think they probably will, because I think a lot of those fringe voters on the day will go, Winston's our guy enough, and he says the right things to them. He'll probably get in with 5-6%. I think we got to be in the mix, frankly. And I think by the time we get to voting day, I think a lot of National supporters in Ireland will probably come to that conclusion.
So if you don't get in this time, will you be hanging around for another 3 years?
Oh, I'm not going to answer that question. I'm totally focused on getting in. I plan to be in Wellington half the time and half the time in Ireland. I'm looking forward to it. I mean, for me, this is also a Christchurch story and a South Island story. You know, Ben Peters is number 3. And, you know, I see that we can tell a South Island story that is not told in Wellington. And I'm not a backbencher. I'm number 1. I can talk about Christchurch and Canterbury day in, day out. And that's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to get the bloody trains running. We're going to get the Southerner back. And we're going to take, you know, Canterbury forward in a way that has not happened in the last 6 years. I mean, our MPs here in Christchurch say nothing. You know, they would be nowhere on the Three Waters, nowhere on the chlorination, nowhere on the MDRS. And so they haven't engaged with the population in Christchurch, and people are a bit hacked off. So when they can have somebody who was their city councillor for 6 years through some pretty tough times in Wellington talking about Christchurch, yeah, I think it's a no-brainer.
Just out of interest, have you caught up with David Seymour or Chris Luxon at all on, you know, potentially what happens unfolds in the next month?
I have had a few conversations with David Seymour, and he's a good guy. I mean, forget about the rhetoric in the media. He's very straightforward to deal with. He, you know, as he says to me, look, you're where I was in 2017. He's been the electorate MP, and he knows what it's like. Now look where ACT is, you know. So I think that's my long-term future for TOP, is to get in Ireland and build the party out. Because I think Labour's gone, because I think they don't know what they stand for anymore. And that's why the Greens are eating their vote, because the Greens are really clear about what they stand for, and people like that. And so, yeah, Chris Luxon, I mean, I remember, you know, spending time with Christopher when he was at Air New Zealand, talking about the future of New Zealand. So I know he gets a lot of this stuff. He's completely into it. I haven't had any conversations with him. I did bump into him in the airport, but we haven't had it. I kind of want to leave him alone. Like, if I have a conversation with him, it's one conversation at the right time. And obviously that would have to happen in the next 2 weeks. So we'll see.
If it was a situation reversed and Labour and the Greens were going really well, would you equally see yourself working in a government with them?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, you know, I mean, obviously a lot of our policies are very progressive. Yeah, I mean, we could work with both sides, really. But the fact is, this is where things are going. You know, Labour's out, essentially, and they're getting the report card for the last 6 years. And that's the problem Hipkins has. It doesn't really matter what he does. People have already gone, nah, end of story.
A lot of people who I chat to say they're really bummed out that there's the Greens sort of had an opportunity 9 years ago to possibly go to that centre role, and they could have been that kingmaker. I think that a lot of people are optimistic that possibly TOP could be that, you know, that kingmaker in the middle now that Green has gone to the left with some of their social policies. Your environmental credentials, you know, a lot of people are interested in you guys there because of potentially getting some strong environmental credentials alongside a national government. Is that something that's really important to you guys?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, that's why we branded as teal. I mean, essentially we're blue-greens. I mean, I could be in the National Party, in the Liberal end quite easily. I probably could have been in the old Green Party. You know, the Jeanettes, the Rods, the Kennedy Grahams. It has gone a little bit, you know, further to the left and is not as attractive anymore. But people like James, people like Chloe, and I've spoken to James. You know, I tried to recruit James to come across, and I said, you know, we can drive a party in the centre who can work with both sides. And I know James could work with National easily, but he can't do it in the Green Party. So I said, come over, take over the party, lead it, you know, rebrand as the Teals. And then suddenly we've got a party that you can rally people around for the future, that is climate focused, that is nature positive, and can, in a way, sort of set the agenda. Whereas the Greens have basically been the lapdog of Labour for 6 years. So, yeah, I mean, yes.
Did he think about it?
Yeah, he did. He did, because they were treating him quite badly at the time. And I would, you know, welcomed him with open arms. I know James a long time. He's a really good guy, really committed. Again, he's a top type guy. He's very straightforward to deal with. He's interested in good outcomes, and a long time Green supporter. And I think he just couldn't quite make the jump, you know. So, but that door was open, and that door is open in the future as well. So who knows, if we get into Parliament, you might find suddenly people go, oh, you're in now. Now can we come and join you? when I was trying to recruit high level people, a lot of them were like, yeah, look, really love what you're doing, but I'm worried about putting my capital into something that it's like a startup, So I've been investing in startups for years. So I'm a risk taker, so I don't mind doing that. But for a lot of people, they'll come in the sort of the B round. You know what I mean?
I do, on the climate change point, I did note when I was looking at your policies that to pay for some of your policies, you're going to take some money from the climate emergency fund.
200 mil.
Yeah. What's
not that much. That's for the public transport.
Right, okay.
Because I thought that this is probably the right place for that to come from. And of course it's a fund, it's essentially just a consolidated fund with a name in the spreadsheet. So yeah, I mean, that's where I think we should fund public transport out of, from the climate fund. I mean, our preference, I've been around, climate change stuff for 25 years, and we've ended up with the ETS. My preference would probably be just a carbon tax and dividend. And then at least it's clear, people can see where this stuff is going, and then probably you get more buy-in. At the moment, I did a debate probably about a month ago. It was to a U3A group, so sort of senior citizens, and we were talking about climate change and the emissions trading scheme. And actually, this guy put his hand up and he said, "Look, can you explain what the emissions trading scheme is?" And I thought, well, this is the problem. There are 100 people there, probably quite well educated. Nobody knew what it was. So I said, okay, it's like this. You basically, when you drive your car and essentially you're emitting carbon dioxide, you pay for that. And that money comes here, and then it goes into a fund, which goes into activities that try to reduce that. And he went, okay, I sort of get that. But we talk about the ETS all the time, but nobody knows what it is. And let's face it, no one knows how it works. And when you get into the gobbledygook of it, it's like, what?
Yeah, it is funny that not a lot of people realise that every time they fill up their car or turn their lights on, they're actually paying for carbon credits.
Yeah, and if they did, it would, it's actually, people can they feel it, it's more real. So in a way, comms is really important. Like the way we communicate a lot of these things, sometimes for us engaged in policy, we can be way too technical, and we're certainly being very guilty of that. So we've tried to simplify things a little bit, which is why we went with the teal card. Let's give people something where you can just go, hey, have you heard about the teal card? And it sounds good, because actually that's how most people think. Like you sort of said, does the average voter understand MMP? No. And every time we have an election, there's an explainer going, oh, well, you get 2 ticks and this does this. And then people go, what?
Hey, I'm going to finish with a niche question from me. My company, Carbon Z, we just launched New Zealand's first biodiversity credit. And I think the challenge that we're seeing in the biodiversity market, a lot of farmers want to get funds to do restoration, but at the moment it's just in a voluntary capacity. Businesses are just it's philanthropic, right? To get biodiversity action on farms at scale, or to get the funds to farmers, we've got to regulate or mandate somehow the purchase of biodiversity credits to have it properly scalable. How are you guys going to do that? Because I see you've been chatting about biodiversity credit.
Yeah, look, Australia has got quite a big model going over there. We've got Toha up on the East Coast Exchange, like David Hall is doing some work around that. And he's been, again, engaged in this space for a long time. It might require government to come in as an underwriter. It's a bit like EVs. So for people on low incomes, they don't buy EVs because they go, it's too expensive. It's just for people, well-off people on the clean car discount buying Teslas, and one day we'll get a cheap secondhand car. But actually, if you're on a low income, it's cheaper for you to buy an EV in terms of your long-term petrol costs, but they can't fund it. Now, if the government then provided initial funding at cost, be paid off within 5 years. And then suddenly you've got everyone into the EV market. So I think with biodiversity credits as well, getting the right exchange platform, and in a way the government underwriting some liquidity for that'll be critical. In terms of what you're doing, I would love to see that integrated with the teal card. So every time people are using public transport, that is kind of getting recorded as a credit in some respects. So if we give people the right incentives, we can change behavior. What we've had to date, and for the last 20 years, is farmers are polluting. It's all kind of in polluting language. It's like people who drive are polluting the atmosphere. If you say that to the ordinary person, they go, well, I can't see that, But if you just say, look, this is contributing to fossil fuel emissions and we're trying to reduce those because we think that will help over, time bring the impact of warming down. And people understand that. So the way we communicate this stuff is critical. So if you tell kids, hey, every time you take public transport, you get a credit. And then what can you do with these credits? So this is thinking out the next 5, 10, 15 years. The tech is going to change. What you're starting now is first phase. In 5 years' time, this is going to be normal. This stuff's going to be on your watch. And I'm excited about that because I'm a kind of tech data numbers guy. And I know if we get the right numbers, the right tech, the right data into our everyday lives, we can all make these small changes. Whereas at the moment, you say to people, oh, what's the biggest impact you can have? And they go, oh, recycling. And it's like, hey, that isn't the biggest impact you can have. In fact, it probably makes no difference, So in a way, how you communicate this stuff is really critical. And when I think about Future Farmers and the work that's doing, communicating this stuff is really critical in a way that people understand. And if you can communicate it so that young people understand, hopefully older people will understand too.
Yeah. I guess just from me to wrap up, I guess, give us your best pitch. Why should someone vote for Top, and why is it not a wasted vote?
Because we need a fresh voice in Parliament. It's absolutely critical that we have fresh voices with new ideas and a party that is totally focused on investing in the future.
Raf, thanks so much for your time. It's funny, I think, although neither Eve or I will vote for you, we're both really rooting for you. So we both want you to get in. Yeah.
You've almost convinced me.
Well, remember, I just want your electorate vote in Ireland. That's it, so...